As Chandra could not come, I will be taking over his role and becoming a moderator. And we are so happy to have two great panelists with us, and from Japan and also from Asia. And both of them has a very strong insight in inclusive growth and also sustainability. And what we would like to do is to take advantage of those two great resources. And we have only two panelists, so we can get into deeper and talk about, first of all, about capitalism and the birth of it. Because as you know, Ken Shibusawa's grandfather's grandfather is Eiichi Shibusawa, who was the father of capitalism in Japan, who has founded quite a few companies, most of the companies in Japan, and not most of them, but quite a few companies in Japan, and has written a book called Confucius and Abacus, so which will tell us about the calculation as well as the philosophy. So I'd like to ask Ken to talk about what is happening, what was it in those days, and what was your grandfather's was trying to do, and let's talk about the history of Japan in terms of capitalism.
Okay. Thank you, Hori-san, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm Ken Shibusawa. Before I get back into Eiichi Shibusawa, I'd like to put this in the modern-day context. And in order to do that, I want to take you back to a wake-up call I had. And the wake-up call I had was a place called Seattle, Washington. Very, very bright, brilliantly blue sky. And if you know Seattle, it rains a lot in Seattle, but it was very, very clear sky. But I was looking at that blue sky on that particular day, and I thought, God, a war can start under such beautiful weather. And the reason why I thought that was it was 2001, 9/11. So I was in Seattle, Washington that morning. I was supposed to fly to Washington, D.C. Obviously, the plane never took off, and I was stranded in Seattle for about a week. And I was looking at that blue sky, and I was thinking, just 6 months ago, I started my own company in 2001. And until then, in the 20s and 30s, my 20s and 30s, I worked in investment banks and hedge funds, where it was natural for just taking over a telephone, and you can move millions, billions of dollars on one telephone call, or just tap of your fingertips. And I looked at the blue sky, and there's not a single airplane flying. Nobody was moving. No goods were going. I had started my business. I had, my young children that was just born, which I couldn't contact back in Tokyo. And I thought, God, how am I going to sustain myself going forward? And so I was really, really depressed looking at this really brilliant blue sky, right? And then 4 days later, I was listening to the radio, and they said, come gather at the International Fountain. And so I looked it up on a map, went. There must have been a couple thousand people gathered around this fountain, a globe, and very, very quiet, very, very quiet scene. And looking at that, and I thought, and it really left this deep impression on me, because I think people that gathered there, obviously was thinking that they need to send their prayers to the lost souls in that New York a couple of days earlier. But I think most of the people there, including myself, we were looking for this answer. Because we had this question without an answer, which means how are we going to go forward? And at that moment, we didn't know. And so to me, my wake-up call then was things like peace, things like sustainability. It's kind of like oxygen or air. You take it for granted. You don't think about it until it's taken away from you. Then you got a big, big problem. So me, I thought that was a big sort of wake up call for me, and having so many people kind of gather there, it was such a really powerful source, and I kind of want to start there in going forward with this conversation, because what drives people, what gathers people, and I think it's things like when you lose your sustainability, that's a big driving force. Now, going back to Hori-san's original question. My grandfather's grandfather, H. Shibusawa, he's known to have started the first bank here in Japan. So a bank back in 1873 was a venture business. And so nobody had seen or heard of a bank. So basically he had to teach the Japanese people what a bank was. And an analogy he used was, he said, it's like a bank is like a mighty river. A money that's dropping like a dewdrop is powerless, but if it gathers at a bank, then it gathers force and it becomes a driving force. And basically that was sort of his story. And if you think about it, from the Meiji Restoration Taisho period going forward, basically people's money kind of came, little dewdrops all over the place. Japan came to the banking system and supported the system here in Japan. So that is my great-grandfather's vision of capitalism. And usually in capitalism, in the modern day language, it's not inclusive. That only the rich gets richer and the poor gets poor in that context, in the modern day context. But if you think about the origins of capitalism as my great grandfather envisioned it, it was more about empowerment of the people, right? I mean, you can't do anything by yourself, but if you gather and if you move your motion toward the right direction, same direction, then you get momentum, then you get power. So it's all about capitalism as an empowerment pool. So my thing about sort of inclusive growth is you really need to kind of go back to the roots of capitalism, saying that it's all about empowerment of the people. And the reason why my great-grandfather was talking about Rongo and Soroban. Rongo is the teachings of Confucius. Soroban is the abacus, which is the first original handheld calculator. So it's basically was saying that morality, ethics, has to go in hand with economy. That was his story. And if you think about sort of the historical background of what he was saying, actually he didn't start saying this back in 1873, right after the Meiji Restoration. His book was released in 1916. 1916 is about 7 years. It's about 11 years after the Russo-Japanese War. So if you think about it, in my great-grandfather's life, when he was born, everywhere in Asia was being colonized by the West, and maybe next it was Japan. And so that generation of people, the utmost sort of priority was to raise the national the power of the nation. And so in that day's language, obviously you needed guns, you needed cannons, you needed the big battleships. But my great grandfather's sort of thing was that, well, who's going to pay for it? And it was the private sector, his thought. So unless you increase the private sector's empowerment, you're not going to get the power of the nation altogether. And in that context, if you think about it, from the Meiji Restoration after the Russo-Japanese War into the 1910s, 1920s, at that point, probably in Japanese history, it was probably the prosperous years for Japan, probably in its entire history, back then, if you think about it. We were talking about the Taisho democracy, which was it's all about empowerment of the people. It was right after the Russo-Japanese War, so things were looking good, right? So why did my great-grandfather was talking about this morality and capitalism? To me, the message there was all about sustainability. So if you just look at the abacus, the calculator, it's important. You're not going to have sustainable growth without learning how to calculate. But if you're just looking at the calculator, the economics, maybe you might trip over, right? And if you're talking about ethics and morality, that's very, very important. But if you just talk about that, nothing's going to happen, right? No new growth. So if you have no new growth, that's not sustainable either. So it's all about both. You need both. It's an and story, not either or. And the story there is all about actually how do you sustain the prosperity going forward. And that was the message back in the Taisho era, 1916. And unfortunately, not many people listened to it, I think, because look what happened after the 1920s. What happened in Japan in 1930s and 40s? Pretty disastrous, right? And so, but if you look at in our modern day, the same kind of message kind of comes across, right? How do we keep the sustain our prosperity that was able, that the Japanese and actually the world have been able to sort of generate over the last several decades. And the message there, I think, it's all about going back to the original sort of. It's about how do you be inclusive, right? why did 9/11 happen? Why is all the terrorism is happening right now? It's because some people felt they're not included in the growth, right? And so I think that my great grandfather, Mrs. back then, and right now, we're basically talking about the same thing.
Let me ask one more question. It's about I always make comparison between Eiichi Shibusawa and also Iwasaki Yatoro, who has founded Mitsubishi. In case of Mitsubishi, it's all like one group. But in case of what your grandfather has done, is more like inclusive in a way that it has incorporated more shareholders and tried to have more wealth to lots of people who have invested in. Could you please tell more about what the philosophy behind?
Sure.
And yes.
Sure. And Mr. Iwasaki and my great-great-grandfather is always sort of described as being this big rivalry between the two, and they had their issues. But I think, and if you look in an interviewing Eiichi back, not myself obviously, but somebody else, his grandson, in his later years, he was talking about, did you really, quote, hate Iwasaki Yataro? And that wasn't the case, right? Just like basically, they had sort of different sort of philosophies, as Hori-san mentioned, about the way of running things. And the primary difference, I think, between the two is Shibusawa Eiichi's motivation was how to empower the people. How do you sort of increase the wealth of the nation, the power of the nation. And Iwasaki Yataro-san's was how do you provide prosperity to your house, to your family, which is a perfectly fine model, I think, right? And so that was the two, and so as a result, he has a very prosperous house, and the Shibusawa family is not so prosperous.
Okay, let's go on to Vijay. Vijay is a friend of mine who has flown in from Asia, and he has a e-commerce company with 5 publicly listed companies underneath his ownership, and e-commerce company has more than $1 billion in sales, and sometimes these sales over exceed that of the Amazon. So that is it's operational and strong in India and Indonesia and also Middle East. And Vijay is also known for philosophical tweeting. He has a follower of more than 300,000 people. At the same time, whenever he goes abroad, he has roughly about 10,000 people coming over to listen to him. So we like to listen to what you have to say about your story and your philosophy. Vijay.
First of all, I'm very honored to be here with Shibusawa-san. Such a very powerful and proud lineage to be part of. Basically, in terms of my own lineage, we're pretty humble, as it were. My father was a government servant, and my grandfather worked in the Malayan Railways. We are originally of Sri Lankan descent, but I'm third generation Malaysian. So basically, growing up in Malaysia per se has been interesting and at the same time rewarding to a great extent, because we have 3 prominent cultures in place, and every Malaysian grows up speaking 3 languages. So it is an asset in a sense. So we're kind of open. We learn to adapt and adjust and accommodate very early, because and my father kept moving around Malaysia quite a bit. As being a government servant, I got to be in different parts of Malaysia, and therefore I had to rub shoulders with everyone. They taught me, gave me different set of skills, because I kept moving schools every 2-3 years. So I had a different set of bullies to deal with every school. So, but then it also taught you communication. It taught you survival skills. And Malaysia, in that sense of the word, is a real crossroads. We have Chinese influence, we have the Indian influence, and also the Malay influence. So, and we are the cross culture of all of that. Plus, 300 years of British, Portuguese, and Dutch rule helps. you know. So we have a real mix, as in Malaysian language we call it rojak. Rojak is where all the various fruits, every fruit you can think of, is put into a bowl and mixed together with a peanut sauce. So, so growing up in Malaysia, I think is something that I would consider as one of my assets. And then having gone on to study in the UK, I had my period of awakening per se. It was after finishing, at least sitting for my finals and completing. I did economics at the University of London, and I left to spend a year bumming around Europe, essentially hitchhiking, the good old days. Nowadays, I wouldn't advise it too much, but now, I hitchhike basically from London all the way down to Greece and back again up, So I spent almost a year on the road. And during that time, I needed to basically find myself, it's a period of learning and awakening. I ended up spending a few months as a lay monk in a Franciscan monastery. So I learned a lot of things there. In the monastery, what amazed me was that in many ways we are so different from each other, and yet in so many ways we are so similar. It led me many years later to write my first book, which is called The Sphere of Silence. In the monastery, I basically learned discipline, which was something that was unique in itself to me as a student coming in from Asian culture, but at the same time it has its commonality. Silence was something that was practiced by the monastic orders in almost every religion. And I went back to my own roots, which was the silence that my grandfather used to practice. The first 2 hours of every day was totally in silence. And at that point, I thought it was weird, no one actually took the time to explain why and what and wherefore. And I realized that this practice, which is very ancient in India per se, is actually a very powerful disciplining. It disciplines the mind. The mind is the single most powerful instrument that we have. And with good reason, language is our greatest tool. An inflection in our tone, a change in our tone can basically change every single word that we say. And being able to manage, adjust, adapt that tone is a very powerful thing to learn. We tend to overpower everyone with a barrage of words. It's like a waterfall. To be able to say the same thing with, say, a sentence or two, as opposed to, half an hour of speech, is much more powerful. And that is what the whole practice of silence is all about. And I learned that not from my own, ancestry, but from a Western, monastic discipline. So that was one of the things that picked me up and is part of my management philosophy per se. Then moving on to work, I ended up working, initially in Europe. I was with one of the big four accounting firms, and then moved across to the US where I did my master's, and then I moved on to work for IBM. And the world of the internet opened up before me. And I recognized that, I saw in it a tremendous potential. While bumming around Europe, the one thing that I recognized is there was a lot more, openness per se between the communities and cultures and countries of Europe, even between East and West. At the time that I traveled, there was an iron curtain. And still, they were a lot more open to each other than we were. Now, coming from Southeast Asia, Malaysia per se is surrounded by Indonesia, Thailand, and so on. Malaysians are more familiar with London than they are with Manila. Malaysians per se are more familiar, traveling across to the States or to the UK per se, than opposed to going to Jakarta. Because we are right next door, but then there are barriers between us culturally and in every other context that has been put into place because at the time of the colonies. For 500 years, you had the Dutch, you had the French, you had the British draw lines, and the Americans, the Spaniards on one side with the Philippines, and the Americans draw lines that remain till today. So when I addressed the ASEAN Educational Forum, when I addressed the ASEAN on a number of issues, because ASEAN this year is supposed to be opening up, and still we are far away. You know, Malaysians do not regard the Philippines as a neighbor. You know, we have, despite the fact that the languages are very close. You know, and same thing applies. I mean, Thailand, for instance, the Thai border, which is right next to us, is a matter of, it's the only common border with the peninsula. And yet, Malaysians, when they cross over, are totally lost. Everything changes within a matter of just, 100 miles. You see? So, whereas in Europe, what I found was the commonality was amazing. I mean, you cross over, from France to Germany, Germany to Italy, Switzerland, so on and so forth. The acceptability, the ability to work across borders, and I worked everywhere. At that point in time, it was a lot easier to work. So I worked in construction sites, I worked in hospitals to keep traveling. I worked in orchards, harvesting this, that, and the other. As a student, everything from petrol stations to security guard, to name it. So, and that was a learning experience. I realized that we are more, we have a lot more commonality. So I married this together with the fact that, the world of the internet was opening up. Spending, 5 years at IBM opened me up to the idea of what the world would be and should be like. So coming back, I was posted around. I went from the States to Canada, then from Canada to Australia. A year in Canada and a year in Australia opened me up also to the different ways people, open up or work within their economies. Because Canada and the US, although they are side by side, are tremendously different. I mean, if you cross over to Canada, you feel a lot more secure walking, the streets at night, so to speak. In the U.S., despite living in Little Rock or living in Houston or living in Illinois or in San Francisco, there are areas that you would never go to. There are places, you would just know within your mind never to drive through, simply because, of the, criminal element and issues of that nature. Whereas Canada, operated on a different framework. Not every policeman carried, a barrage of guns around. It was yet far more secure, and there was really only difference was the culture. And in Canada, if you can walk the streets, because -10 is very difficult, -25 it gets even worse. But it's safer. And then Australia had its own context, so I learned from that too. And having come back to Malaysia, I looked at the difficulties we were facing within ASEAN. To do business in Malaysia, by say you have 20 million people at the time. Now it's closer to 30. To reach 20, to create a market for 20 million people, you're very much limited. But if you cross the border in Indonesia, you had 240 million people. And now it's closer to 300 million people. And we are not reaching into those borders. Malaysian businessman doesn't get up in the morning saying, hey, I got to sell something in Indonesia. No. Your target is to sell something in the UK maybe, but Indonesia, no. The Philippines, 100 million people, and we don't think of it as a market. So I actually went across to Manila, where I spent a couple of years there. Most of my work was being a consultant, both in KL and in Manila. And I realized the potential, and at the time I said, we got a group of like-minded people together, and we went to begin this company that I have right now. And when we went, we decided to launch it in Hong Kong. And why Hong Kong? Primarily because Hong Kong, to me, was one of the freest economies on the planet. Barring none, be it the US, be it, UK. In Hong Kong, we are one of the freest economies in the market. And I'm a strong proponent of the free market. I was fortunate enough to sit in on lectures from Milton Friedman when I was in London. Fortunate enough to also be influenced by Kenichi Omae from here. His book on the borderless economy was a very great eye-opener for me. So based on all this, I went into Hong Kong at the time the internet bubble burst. Everyone was fleeing, the IT industry. But at the same time, they were fleeing Hong Kong because it was the handover. So they were fearing what would happen when China came in. So when I went in '98, it was the first year of the Chinese takeover, there was empty office spaces in Hong Kong, which is very unusual indeed, and particularly in the prime locations. I was able to walk in, locate, and negotiate an office space in one of the best addresses in Hong Kong for a fraction of the price I would have paid 2 years earlier or 2 years later. So we were good timing, you might say. But in every crisis, according to his venerable Confucius, or maybe it was, it would probably have been, the art of war. Sun Tzu Ping Fa, as they say in Chinese, by Sun Tzu. Where it says, in every crisis, there's an opportunity. Believe me, there was one when I went to Hong Kong. And so we launched an e-commerce platform. And the way we looked about for a proper, way to test the market, as it were. At the time, '98, we were 2 years short of the Olympic Games. The Olympic Games Committee, basically, we approached the Olympic Games Committee because we were, by chance introduced to them, and they were saying they were having a struggle moving all of their product lines across the world. They had 42 different regions across the world that they were selling it to. So we came in and we said, okay, we will be number 43. And so what region, they asked. I said, the world of the internet. They literally laughed me out of the office. What internet? I mean, this is '98, mind you. This is before Amazon and eBay and all of this. So basically our position was, give us an opportunity. They said, all right, we'll give you the country that couldn't sell one product, the Philippines. And I had come from Manila. So I said, all right, let's give us a couple of months. You're not sold one product, give us 2 months and we'll come back with you. So we opened up in the Philippines, per se, selling Olympic gold coins, medallions, etc., so on and so forth. But we realized we couldn't make any impact without the last mile. The last mile meaning, you see, from the internet, there has to be a human factor involved in closing the sale. So we incorporated direct sales into this. So we said, all right, to everyone who sells one of these, you get a commission. Suddenly, the Filipinos who were not interested became very interested because we paid the commission in US dollars. All right, so the Filipino mindset, which is very entrepreneurial, because they sell everything, all right, in amounts, in small amounts, suddenly turned it around. And from there, we were able to convince the Olympic Games to give us the world market. Within the period of 18 months, every other region had 4 years to sell their products. Within a period of 18 months, we basically topped the list of products before the Olympic Games. So we realized we were sitting on pretty much of a gold mine. So after the Olympic Games, we started expanding our product range. We went on, to various other gold coins first, and then we went into watches. Then we began a process of backward integration. Watches, for instance, we bought our own Swiss watch company. It was a 100-year-old company. We took it over. They were selling very specifically to a very select group of, because they were producing less than, 1,000 watches a month, so 300-400 maybe, and it was being sold within a very select market, and they had existed like that for 100 years. So we came along, took it over, maximized it, and it became one of our top-selling brands. Now every watch that's produced never goes out to the market because it's sold before it's even made. And then we expanded it to a second brand and on to a third. So we started with Simier, and then we had Bernhard Meyer, which was a German brand. Pforzheim being a city just across from Switzerland that produced excellent watches. So we started with Pforzheim and created Bernhard Meyer and moved on to Kairos. So we had 3 brands on the market, and from there we've just been building hotels. We have gone into telecommunications, we've gone into nutrition, cosmetics, we've gone into skincare, and a whole lot of other things. We have 18 companies in the group today.
Very good. So how many people do you employ now, and how many people do you support as a, let's say, agent at this moment?
We have in terms of direct employees, about 1,000 people. You know, we have basically in our Southeast Asian markets, 8 offices that have about 1,000 people. But we have 32 offices around the world, smaller offices as well. Then we, through our public listed companies, we probably have closer to 5,000 people employed through the group. In terms of the agents, so to speak, out there selling products across the world, we have a database of 9 million customers, out of which we have anywhere between maybe 2 to 250,000 who are selling it on a on and off basis, and maybe anywhere between 80 to 100,000 who are doing it full time.
Okay, very good. So let's go on to inclusive growth and sustainability. And I can mention about inclusive growth, meaning about morality and also empowering people, and sustainability as that we have to be able to build business model to sustain, and we need to have an abacus, which is a calculation. So first of all, Vijay, what is your definition of inclusive growth, and how do you think the inclusive growth is possible?
Well, the first thing that I had to recognize with was, as we went on to a borderless global economy, that there was a global and a local factor to everything. And there were cultural differences we had to come to terms with, and also jurisdictional differences that we had to deal with all the time. And it is unless and until that a business actually gives back to the jurisdiction, to the culture in which it is located, it will never be regarded as part of their own ecosystem, as it were. It doesn't matter that you are local or you're foreign, but if you are not giving back, you're not seen as giving back, you're not participating in that economy, not in some form or another a part of them, part of whoever they may be. And also in bringing together a global frame of reference, we realized that we had to start creating. And this has been incorporated in terms of a foundation that we began almost instantly. The first thing we realized was in giving, in helping, there was a lot of problems out there. It's easy to give in the sense that, okay, write a check out to Red Cross, and you're done. Your conscience-wise, your work is done. Your CSR is done. But the reality is, a great portion of that check never reaches the end user. So we have been there and done that, and we learned through some very rough lessons, as it were, that actually trying to help someone is hard work. All right? I mean, seriously hard work. So we recognize and we set up a foundation that now specializes in sustainable CSR. And that is about, continuing CSR, not a one-off thing. A one-off thing rarely goes very far.
So Ken, inclusive growth and also sustainability, how do you define, and what are the importance, and what do you think we should do?
Sure. I think keywords like inclusive growth, diversity, sustainability, it's a 21st century word, if you think about it. I don't remember talking about this back in the 20th century. And the reason, it's pretty clear, because in the 20th century model of prosperity, how do you become prosperous was you increase productivity by becoming more efficient. So it was sort of like, Vijay talked about the human factor. It was sort of like, it was more like the machine factor. And if you had the growth, basically, you didn't need the diversity, right? You just had to have all the same parts, and you just roll it forward, and it kept on rolling. And that was the prosperity model of the 20th century. And so there was nothing wrong with that, I think. But in the 21st century context, if you think about it, look at Japan, for instance. We had a very nice run in the growth period, and then we struggled for the last 20-some-odd years in the 21st century because we were a mature economy, aging society, and all that kind of stuff. There's other countries out there that have nice population pyramids going forward, can see growth going forward. Other areas in the world where the political situation won't allow that. So if you think about it, the 21st century compared to 20th century is much, much more diverse in terms of sort of the stages of development, I think. And maybe in the 20th century, probably there was that diversity there as well. But the thing is, we realize there's diversity in the 21st century because of the technology, I think, right? We can fly anywhere. And Vijay would not be able to reach 9 million people unless there was technology. And so basic technology, what technology allowed was to bring sort of the diversity closer together so we can see that there is such a diverse world. But in the 21st century, I think what we're realizing in the 20th century model, where you just sort of increase the efficiency, allocate your resources to the most efficient portion of the economy or whatever, it was a great model, but it wasn't inclusive, I think, right? And that's why you have the problems we have. I mean, I'm not talking about the developing world, but even the United States, if you think about it, it's having these problems of sort of racial tensions that I haven't seen, because I grew up in the U.S. in the 70s and 80s. And, and there's a little bit of that from the civil rights movement in the 60s. Then around when Obama came into the administration, I thought, wow, the U.S. finally sort of kind of got over that. But now, the last couple of years, you're seeing a lot of these tensions. A couple of years earlier, they had this thing about taking over Wall Street and that kind of stuff. So even in the United States, you're having this sort of tensions between the have and the have-nots. And so the inclusive society is assuring the sustainability of the prosperity that we have been able to enjoy going forward. And so it's a really important topic, I think, for everybody to think about. And thank you for joining us.
Well, when there was a Great East Japan earthquake in 2011, March 11th, and I looked up what would those your great grandfather has done in supporting in the time of Tokyo Daishinsai, which is like earthquake in 1910 or something, 1923. And so I looked at all those people who have contributed at the time of crisis and what they have done. And then I found out that H. Shibusawa was writing letters overseas. And that time, Japan was hugely, heavily indebted, and to be able to borrow money from overseas. And he has written letters overseas to ensure that Japan is safe, and Japan is orderly, and then we will be able to pay back the money. And please be patient to be supporting us all the way through. And he has also, at the same time, he has also provided the asylum to those people who don't have, who have burned the houses, and also. And that is, I think, it's also about inclusive. And we also have Binod, who is here, and he is on the cover of Forbes Asia, and he has done a lot in terms of Nepali earthquake. I'd like to hear your story and about what you means by inclusive growth and what is the sustainability from your standpoint of view.
Thank you, Yoshito. I appreciate the opportunity to share my perspective. I mean, in any heterogeneous society, inclusive growth becomes a huge challenge. Rich become the rich, and poor become or continue to remain in difficult situation. This also applies to nations. I talked a little bit this morning about somewhat the Nepal situation vis-a-vis China and India, two of the world's biggest and the fastest growing economies. It's not enough to have the opportunity having in front of you. It's more importantly, how do you create the capacity of taking advantage out of that opportunity? I mean, we often try to extend that helping hand in order to sort of empower the deprived sector. Okay? I mean, this morning in one of our sessions, one of the panelists talked about his experience on the microfinancing. I mean, that's one model of an inclusive, sustainable growth that Professor Muhammad Yunus tried to sort of take forward in the Bangladeshi concept. In the Bangladeshi context, it worked extremely well. But same times, his experience in Mongolia was completely different. Our group is at the moment engaged in taking the impact investment concept forward in order to make, in order to engage with the youth, with ideas, with education, so that there is no migration. One of the biggest problems that countries like ours are facing today, and I'm sure there are many similar countries, because as the youth get educated, the whole world becomes the market for them. So how do you retain them with purposeful activities which not only helps them to grow, but they also in turn help the country to grow in order to make the whole environment more sustainable, more inclusive. Nepal, I can again give the example of my own country. Probably it's one country where billions and billions of dollars have been thrown in by different donor agencies, from World Bank to IMF or whatever. Okay? I don't think it has made a significant difference. I don't think aid can help a country to grow or make the society inclusive. I think it is, at the end of the day, it is the society themselves, they need to be awakened. They need to be trained, they need to be educated, they need to be made aware that there are no free lunches and you have to do it yourself. Our poverty index of Nepal came down to less than 25% from 60%. It's because 6 million Nepalese people went out to work. Today we get $6 billion. And the monies have gone exactly where it was needed. Because wherever life was more difficult, from that place the people went out first. When we had the Maoist conflict, it became very difficult for the masses to stay on. Either they were recruited by the Maoists or they were recruited by the army. So the people had no choice. So people went out of compulsion, but that has become the silver lining for the transformation of the economy. And that's what I call inclusive growth. These masses are bringing in capital, they're coming back, they're becoming entrepreneurial because they've been trained, they've seen wherever they've gone, no matter what level of the work they were involved in, Middle East or Malaysia or wherever, many of them in Japan too. So I think that is a form of a growth, inclusive, in terms of inclusiveness and sustainability that I believe in.
Thank you very much. So we'd like to engage the audience as much as possible. Whoever has something to say, please raise your hands, anytime you want. And at the same time, I'd like to ask Vijay a question about, you have established a university. What is the intention behind, and what else do you think you're doing for the inclusive growth of Asia or sustainability?
I, first of all, like to acknowledge Mr. Chowdhury's commentary on inclusive. I totally agree to a great extent, particularly within the Nepalese context as well. We've faced these sets of challenges everywhere we've gone. Every country has been a different challenge within us to try and make our growth inclusive. Our growth has been global, so at the same time, it is local in a sense. So we have to keep contributing back. Within the Malaysian context, Malaysia has been promoting itself as an educational hub. So we were at one point, considering what would be our legacy project, what would be our way of returning, of giving back. And it seemed that part of our belief system, the culture that we have created within our company, all of this can be best propagated, best inculcated back into the students, the new generations that are coming into Malaysia and into the region. Malaysia promotes itself as a hub, so we, have students coming in right now into our university from like almost 11 countries. So we saw it as a brilliant opportunity for us to both give back and then also perpetuate our legacy. We believe the motto of the company is rhythm. Raise yourself to help mankind. And that is what we have believed. It's something that we have actually got from our cultural icon. There's an icon for the company as well, who has been Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi was chosen not because of anything else, because he was the man of the millennium. He didn't actually belong to any single country. He was born in British India and traveled on British papers to the UK to study, went on the same British papers to South Africa to work, came on South African papers to India, refused to accept Indian papers even until the point of his death, because he was totally against the separation, so to speak, partition of India. So he, in a sense, is a man without a country, a stateless man, which makes him, basically a man that belongs to the world. His message was to the world. His message was very strong and very powerful, and something that we within our company incorporate till today. One of the aspects of the company is we are vegetarian as a company, primarily because we, like Gandhi, we believe in nonviolence, in simply not perpetuating any kind of violence, and therefore we have chosen different methodologies of expressing who we are. The university is, together with the state government of Perak in Malaysia, they have allocated 2 plots of land for us to develop. One is 26 acres in the city, that's our city campus, another 250 acres where we are developing a university town. And we believe in that, in the fact that a university needs to be a place where you can come and immerse yourself in. Therefore, the best universities in the world tend to be university towns. And I went to one of them in University of Illinois, where basically you live within the context of the university. The town itself exists for it. So you never actually leave the university, except to go out for a vacation per se. That creates a continuity of sorts, creates a community of sorts, a networking that is brilliant, because that allows us to continue even well after you graduate and come on out. So this university is built on that. It's built on also zero carbon emissions. It's built on getting off the water grid as well as the power grid as much as possible. Our building in Kuala Lumpur is off the water grid. We have a unit right on top of the building that basically dehumidifies the water. We have very humid as a country, but yet the water resources are limited. So it basically dehumidifies 1,000 liters a day into a tank on the very top, and the entire building goes off the water grid. And that way we become ecological, building, green building, as it were. So our university project is a way of us being able to perpetuate the environment and ecology, to perpetuate or instill into them inclusion as part of their lifestyle, into the lifestyle of the people who graduate and come out of these universities, that they have to think about giving back to the community. We have a chance now to do it at the ground level. And that's primarily the reason the university was put together. And we have tried very much also to build a spirit of entrepreneurship. The way forward is to create, what I found is during the sessions discussing during the World Economic Forum, where we have spoken, at the Commonwealth Business Forums where I've spoken, and also at the ASEAN forums, we have a mentality and attitude that needs to be corrected. 8 out of 10 students coming out of the best institutions in India, for instance, India being one of the prime educational centers in Asia. Not only is it, we have some of the best universities in the world. In India, we also have some of the best, intellectual minds coming out of there. But 8 out of 10 of them, and we're talking about students coming out of IIM and IIT who could go just about anywhere, are looking for a job. In essence, they're job seekers. But if you take the same number and go back to China, for instance, or Hong Kong, University of Hong Kong. 8 out of 10 people coming out of these universities in China, Taiwan, Japan, they have no interest. Getting a job for them is a transition. If at all they need to get a job, it's a transition. It's not the be-all and end-all. I mean, no one wants to retire in a job coming out of these universities. They want to come out and create jobs. So the mentality is job seeker or job creator. And the attitude in India needs to change. So now the same thing is what we are trying to instill into our students, entrepreneurship, that they go out to become job creators.
Very good. Who would want to jump in to discuss? Tori-san, please.
Thank you. Tori from Birmingham. Shiba-san, you talked about the importance of ethics to when talk about sustainability in the diverse world and the difference between the rich and poor getting bigger. How can we keep reminding people ethics as an important part, and what can we do about it? Because there's a concern about people trying to do whatever to become more richer, maybe being even uncompliant. So your thought on this would be appreciated.
Thank you. It's a big question, and it's difficult. I think ethics it's not a rule. It has to come in from within. And so when you talk about ethical capitalism, it sounds like sort of like easy, nice capitalism, but I think it's very, very difficult because there's not a single rule you follow, but it has to come from your heart, basically. And ethics basically is, as Vijay mentioned, I think it's the human factor in a positive sense. I mean, there's a lot of the negative human factors, but in a positive sense. And I think it's something that you can't do by yourself. You can't sort of like learn ethics by yourself, right? It's very difficult. And even for me, just sort of like going through this this topic, it's much. I kind of get my sort of thoughts by just having these kind of discussions or group discussions, because everybody has a sort of different sort of perspective about the same thing, right? And so there's no one correct answer. So that's, to me, the beauty of ethics is that it is sort of, if you think about it, it kind of always creates the next question. There's no easy answer, and that's I think that's the most difficult part, but that's the most important part, because if there's an easy answer, then you just then your sort of mind stops and you don't think much further beyond that, I think. And so I talked about the and the or. The concept of or is very important because it enables you to compare black and white, 0 and 1, and it kind of enables to move forward. It's very, very important. But the 0 and 1 in black and white assumes that there's always black and white existing, right? So there's no new creativity, I think, from that. But if you talk about ethics and capitalism, which if you think, it's like, well, it doesn't fit right, And so if you give up on it, then there's no new creativity. But if you keep on thinking about it, maybe if you just turn the angle a little bit, it might fit, and things like that. And I think the and word, it allows for creativity. It allows the room for creativity. If you just say black or white, then that's the end of it. Maybe if it's black and white, then there's something new that comes out of it.
May I just add my thoughts on the subject? Ethics to us in Eastern context, especially in most of the spiritual or the religious beliefs in the East, are built upon the concept of what the Americans called, what goes around comes around. Whatever you do comes back to you in some form or another. It's a belief system that has sustained in our cultures for the longest period of time. And in a sense, I would subscribe to it, It is inevitable that even in the Muslim culture, it is built into the fact where they say true wealth is what you do for others. And in the Hindu culture, in the Buddhist culture, it's exactly the same. What you do for others is the only currency that you get to take with you, as it were. There's a good little story that I relate to sometimes when we talk about being inclusive or doing CSR per se. It's this story of a maiden that goes down to the river every day to get water. basically, for her needs and for the business that she did, pottery. So she needs water. She'd go down to the village every day, to the river, which is a walk. It's quite a walk down from the village to the river. She gets some water and she carries it back. But she uses a pot that is cracked on one side, and water keeps dripping out in very small drips all the way up. And considering that she's in the pottery business, she could easily replace it. So she was asked, why do you use these pots that have holes in them? They're old pots that, half the water is lost by the time she gets back to her village. And so she has to do more trips up and down. And her answer was very simply that as I'm walking down this path, the water keeps dropping, on the side. And there are little plants all along the way. And these plants flower and makes that entire walk so beautiful, because now I have all these flowers all the way up to my village. So I lose a little bit of water, but my work becomes a lot more beautiful.
Can I ask one more question?
Okay. Anybody else want to have more questions? Okay, Tori-san.
A different topic. Vijay, you spoke about the power of silence, and maybe a few words, depending on the tone, can be powerful. Now I think in the global meetings, we Japanese tend to have difficulty to dominate the discussion, right? So any advice you can give to us by speaking a few words, but with powerful message?
Well, I always describe one of my reasons for the practice of silence. I have, as I said, written a book about it. And the concept of starting the day in silence allows you to order your thoughts. Your mind is your single most powerful instrument. And being able to train your mind. I mean, we do a lot of work right now in terms of every hotel has a gym. We go out there, work in the gyms, run up and down the hills, and have to get all physically fit. But we spend very little time on yoga for the mind, if you like. Physical body yoga, we are willing to send, people halfway across the world, spend half an hour a day, do all of these sacrifices. But the mind, we don't train the mind. We don't spend very little time in the mind. And the mind is the most valuable, most brilliant instrument we will ever have. It is, in fact, arguably, I'm told, Einstein is supposed to have used anywhere around, 1 to 5% of his mind, brain power, as it were, 1 to 5% of his brain upon, his death. This is what the scientists talk about. If that were the case, then someone somewhere has made a mistake, either giving us something that's too powerful for us to use, or we are making a mistake of not being able to realize the power of this mind. Now, another way for us to look at the body, I use the body as a classic example, is the fact that the body is our oldest scripture, per se. We, in every religion, we talk about the body as being, designed by a more divine force, whatever you choose to call him. And if this divine force has created this body, then in it is a message, and therefore it is a scripture. And now, looking at the scripture, we have 2 ears to listen, 2 eyes to observe, even a pair of nostrils to breathe. We have 2 sections to the heart, left and right, 2 hands to work with, 2 legs to run with. Almost everything is in duality. So, but there's one thing right in the middle of our face, which is only one. And in there is a very powerful message. It says to you, in my mind, it says to you, listen twice as much as you speak, observe twice as much as you speak, breathe twice as much as you speak, work twice as much as you speak. But what do? The exact opposite. And then we say, why is all of this coming to naught? Saying the wrong word at the wrong time is enough to start wars. Saying the wrong word, can destroy a relationship. And by that same token, saying the right word at the right time can save a relationship. So silence helps in that.
Any questions? Any comments? Yes.
I had a chance to work in Malaysia several years, and I learned how mixed your culture is a bit. So could you give us, to Japanese people, how to, when we talk about ethics, but maybe Malaysian people would think many differently. Each individual people think different, take the different ways in ethics. So could you, from your diversified cultural background, could you give us Japanese people to some tips how to think about ethics in business scenes? Because in this globalized world, ethics is not a simple single thing. So we have to think about many cultural aspects. So
Before you go, let's collect whoever who has more questions. Maybe because of, yes, yeah.
No, just a comment. Just a comment. How to say that aid is not correct. You are right. They by themselves have to be independent and have to make the business money. This is we will help. How to say. I totally agree with you. That's all.
We'd like to have two more voices from the audience. And I think sometimes it's good to speak up rather than silence. Yes, one. And one more. Any female participants? Yeah,
Hi, I want to share my thoughts. I used to work at Lehman Brothers for 4 years, and it was a great companies, and people talked about ethics and diversity and all those were kind of those kind of things. But finally, as you guys know, it's bankrupt. And I think there's one pressure. One of the pressure was stock prices. So I think maybe a question to Vijay and Shibusawa-san, but Shibusawa-san, especially you are investor to Japanese equities, and when you invest in the companies, you require performance of the stock price, but also what kind of things you look at from ethics or inclusivity or sustainability perspective.
Okay. Any female participants? Yes.
So thank you for your sharing. I'm a student of GLOBIS, part-time student, and I used to be work for GE Japan, and so in GE, integrity is a common sense among the all employees. But recently, we have a huge business crisis in the major Japanese company. I don't mention them name, but so this is my personal opinion. Showing integrity sense mindset is very difficult in Japanese companies. How do you think about it?
Okay, it's okay from the audience. Okay, so Vijay and Ken, maybe Vijay about Malaysian part, and Ken about one of the counterpart, and also about investment. So who wants to start first?
All right.
Okay.
On the question about investing, we invest in 30 companies for enduring the next generation, which means approximately 30 years, which doesn't mean we buy and hold for 30 years, but hopefully in that 30-year time horizon, that despite the changing environment of the markets or the industry, that particular company can evolve to the next stage. And looking at that, obviously it's an investment, so we have to look at the financials and cash flow, and we call it at the mieru kachi. So anything that can be sort of anything you can put a number on it. And it's very important because numbers are a common language, and that you can, it's easy to sort of describe the value in terms of numerics. But numbers are actually past performance, I think. And if you're trying to sort of forecast or hope for the future, it's more about the non-numerical, non-tangible assets we call mienai kachi, the hidden value, and in that it involves things like integrity, sort of inclusivity, diversity, things that you really can't put a number on it. One of the important I think value in a company is the ability for that company to have dialogue power. I call it taiwaryoku. That doesn't mean just with the shareholders. It doesn't just mean with their customers, but also it needs to have with their employees, with the stakeholders, and that's, to me, that's the real governance in a company, I think. So basically we look at the non-tangibles as an investment criteria is the answer to your question in a nutshell. And regarding that large Japanese company, it's sort of discomforting in a sense, because you think, wow, they're a respected company, and there's a lot of respected company in that sort of same class. But I think in that respect, they were sort of in their sort of closed ecosystem inside their company. Actually, so they didn't have that sort of taiwaryoku, the dialogue power, with the outside sort of, and they had some outside board directors, yes, but I think it wasn't in their corporate genetics to sort of include sort of outside sort of view on what their operation is all about. And so it's a concern, not just for that company, but it's sort of a common sort of theme for large Japanese companies that's been in existence for like hundred of years. So they have a way of sort of doing things in their way, but it is a problem. I think just sort of going back to sort of put it in the perspective of inclusive growth, like things like diversity and things like that. Basically, but the person that wants to be, has to want to be included, right? Because like we talk about diversity, josei no katsuyaku, women empowerment, very important. But that person wants to be. If that woman doesn't want to be empowered, then it's not. It doesn't start, right? But so I think you want to be included. That's very important, I think. But the second part of it is like you have to realize that, oh, I can be included. And so that's the big sort of question. I think it kind of goes back to the role of education in university, and just the role of education is that, I didn't realize I had that sort of option to be included. I'm not just talking in the corporate world, but in sort of the global context as well. And I think that's the power of education, knowledge, and things like that. That you can be included in this growth.
Okay, Vijay.
Briefly, if I could just continue that. Within our own company, we have something like taiwaryoku. It is something that has been incorporated, from the very inception of the company. We call it management by consensus or consultative management. And it is very important, again, for people to feel that they can be part of the process. There's nothing you can do to force them to be part of the process. Many of them would prefer sometimes not to, but then if that platform is there where they can announce or be part of the process, where there is a voice for them to be heard and not be actually penalized for it, then integrity becomes a lot more alive in these companies, because people will speak up, and it is also pretty much within scripture to say there is wisdom in the masses. We sometimes just have to listen. So it doesn't take away from the responsibility of the people in authority, the stakeholders, as well as the people who make decision. Decision makers are not required to follow, but can they be influenced? Yes. That's how ethics is controlled. I mean, Lehman Brothers needs to have someone who questioned everything they did, and that process that would have helped them, analyze everything that they're doing in a different context. In terms of integrity, there is if we started to write a book about integrity, it would just keep on being endless. It's like a telephone directory. The issue, though, is to break it down to its simplest context, and that is be good, do good. bottom line. And how do we basically, everything we examine, we need to examine every act within the company and outside, whether there is something good coming out of it. Is there something good that it was derived from? Good meaning, it's a very generic word. It's easy to, use the word. But the context within us changes. Within all of us, good has its own application. That's where Taiwadokku comes into being. And you basically need to have that. Then you question, even when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about investment, when we talk about, even CSR projects, such as, and I totally agreed with Mr. Chowdhury, we need to basically be in CSR on doing anything out for, it has to be sustainable. Giving a person a job doesn't answer, the problem. It's just as much as, giving a person a fish. You have to teach him to fish. If you give a person a fish every day, it's an endless job. So aid, in that sense, will continue forever because they come to rely on the fact you are giving them fish. But if you teach them how to fish, then they stand on their own feet. And that is, in a very simplistic sense, that is what sustainable inclusion should be all about. And sustainable inclusion goes back to the ethics. Ethics should be part and parcel of, if we are going to be around for years to come, then we need to think beyond. If we are basically in there for the profit and maximizing profit, then we are basically in and out very fast. It's like maximizing profit is playing the casino. But if you're going to basically focus on long-term growth, then we need to take a look at the secondary, tertiary effect of everything that we do.
Very good. Thank you very much. The topics was inclusive. Yes? I think we have to close. I'm sorry. The topics was about inclusive growth and sustainability. And the topic has been quite vague and ambiguous, but I think we have learned a lot about inclusive growth. There was things about morality, ethics, and also sustainability is more about calculation. We need to have a business model to be able to sustain it. And also empowerment of people is almost quite important. Binod mentioned about awakening of society is more important than getting some kind of grants from the government. I remember after March 11th, we started a foundation called KIBO. KIBO stands for Hope and Rainbow. So we combine Rainbow Hope and started KIBO. We went all the areas, devastated areas by tsunami, and then we found out there was an awakening of society. People were awakened simply because they gotta do something for the people who have died by tsunami. However, they need to have some kind of education. So we have decided to start up a school in Sendai, and there are quite a few students who have come from Sendai. And at the same time, we have started to have grants to those people who are quite willing to stand up, do something as NPO, like a social entrepreneurs. And so grants was small, but it has pushed lots of people to start something. And now we are starting what we call social capital investment, which is more for the sustainability. In case of grants, it's not sustainable. But in case of social capital investments will require the companies or social entrepreneurs to be able to make the business model to be sustainable. And that will push forward for the companies to come and social entrepreneurs to start up. I think what we are learning from this panel is that what we need is the one strong ethics and also some desires, and to help people, to support people by using cooperation capitalisms as a vehicle to make it sustainable. And I think that's what we have been learning. And in order to do that, we need to include as many people as possible, as more variety of people as possible. And hopefully it should be borderless by having some cooperation with Binod Foundation, maybe with Kibo, and maybe with Vijay's foundation, so that we can combine maybe like Nepal, which is also India and China, as well as Asia and Japan. And I think we can do something with that. And that's what we are learning. And together with long time ago, going back to 1874, when your great-great-grandfather has started, and there's a history to be behind, and also there's a future to come. And so thank you very much for attending this this panel about inclusive growth and sustainability. I hope you have learned as much as I have done. Thank you very much. And please give a big hands of applause to Ken Shibusawa and Vijay Eswaran, and also Vinod. Thank you very much.